Teams have punched their ticket into the dance. The stampede is over. Giddy up, it's playoff time on the Junior Beast Pod. Let's go.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West. And Kerr,
what?
7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes the shot and buries that.
We have our playoff teams set. The season is over. We'll get to the playoff previews right away, but first, we gotta review how we got here. My name is Keenan, joined as always by Muhammad, and let's start with the teams who missed the playoffs. I feel like we should start in the North. Let's start with the CROW.
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of a playoff race and recap season autopsy here before we roll in to some of these series breakdowns. And you're right, Keenan, that's a good place to start off with the CROW. They sort of had their season derailed early with losses to the Outlaws, going 0-2 against them. They went on a little trip into Saskatoon, went 1-2 there. Also had a blown lead to a weakened Warrior team early in the season, and their fate was sort of sealed before the season even started. And by Game 7, you could sort of see the writing on the wall. I think that defense and goaltending need to be addressed. They surrendered, and listen to this, they surrendered double digits against in 19 of 20 games this year. Just impossible to win consistently like that. They did make a quality trade, as we talked about at the deadline, that should set them up nicely for 25. And it's going to be a make or break year for the guys in purple next season.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think the CROW definitely, started off on the wrong foot. And, we talked about it in our preseason show that, I personally had the CROW at number 1. And I will admit when I'm wrong, I was very off on that projection this year. But just things didn't go right for them out of the gate. I don't think head coach Garen Schmerman was too happy about the way that his season started, and obviously not happy with the way it ended. But next year, I will be interested to see what they do, especially with some high picks early in this draft next year.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's been a team in the last couple of years that has drastically underachieved. I think their personnel, when healthy, has been much better than what their record would indicate, at least this year. And it just, I don't know, it's fallen short somewhere, and I think it's going to be a really big offseason and draft upcoming for them to sort of try to get situated and maybe live up to some of that potential and what should be a pretty big opportunity for them to reach the provincials next year in a reshaped North Division. Now let's go over to the Central, and we'll talk about the Rampage, who I think it's safe to say are the best team not in the 2024 playoffs in Alberta Junior B lacrosse. It was a strange season for them. The defending Central champions, they come out of the gate and they really struggled to score despite playing in some tight games. And then they started looking like a real threat, like about mid-season. They went on a run. And then, as the season came to an end and they went down the stretch, it went off the track somewhere. I thought, it's a team that's built from the net out, and they actually gave up 10 goals per game over their last 9 and went 1-7 down the stretch. Their only win coming against the Rockies. And I just think that that had to have been a tough way to end for a team that I really thought had some real solid offensive pieces. Tisdale had an outstanding season. Dowswell's always a threat. Couchman, and I thought that there was a lot there to sort of work with. In the end, they sort of got bit by what was a tough division. And, I think in general, it's good for the sport to see playoff races that come down to the stretch like that. And it's something that, we need to see more of in the league in general.
The fact that playoff picture wasn't even shaped until essentially the very last day of the season is just a testament to this league and just how tight some of these games can be and how important every win really is, especially in a 20-game season. I agree. I think they are I think they are the best team on the outside looking in. especially with a roster like you mentioned, you got guys like Wells, like Tisdale. You got so much talent on that team, and unfortunately, there was just that 1-7 stretch just bit them, and that was that for their season, unfortunately, with a chill team that started to pick up at just the right time.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. And they did lose a handful of very close games, and that whole division was like that all season. And I don't think you'd have it any other way. And I think it was a fitting end to what was a great Central Division with both 1-2 and 3-4 on the line on the final day, with all four teams playing each other. I think that's something that's great for the league, great for the sport, and I think moving forward, I hope to see a little bit more of that in terms of a lot of these divisions and these playoff races going down the stretch. Now let's go east, and this is a team that I think probably didn't have the highest of expectations going into the season. I think they had a few games where they really played up and shocked some teams. But I mean, in the end, I don't think it was to anyone's surprise that they were the team in the East that fell short. The extra travel and all the shuffling of APs in and out wouldn't have helped either. I think they had some guys that really stepped up throughout the year. I thought that Henry Elliott, in the couple games I saw, looked pretty good, but it wasn't enough. They didn't have the depth, and having an A team in Saskatoon makes life more difficult than it would in other places. And I think that there's things to figure out there moving forward, just as a program, not just on the B team, but in A as well. And until the numbers sort of start to improve, I know their U17 program has made the North final the last couple of years. I actually think they won the North this year, so maybe they'll get an influx of a little bit of talent there. But it's been strong at that level for a few years now, so we'll see how things developed there, but it was a tough season for the SWAT.
And I don't think their record, I believe their record was 4-16-0. Yes, it was 4-16-0. I don't think that fully is a testament to what this SWAT team is capable of. Like, you look at these games, and they were, sure, they had some beatings. Like, there were a couple games, like the 18-0 loss to the Blizz, the 20-3 loss to the Rebels. But they were pulling out some tight games, like a 12-11 loss to the Outlaws, a 12-10 to the Marauders, that was a win. The 12-11 loss to the Kings early in the season. So this SWAT team has potential, and just a couple of lucky bounces, and this could be a team that's looking maybe not at playoffs, but a team that could have been like 8-12-0 essentially.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, there's some extra constraints that are more difficult on teams like Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Regina. When you go on the road, you're playing 3 games in essentially 24 hours. Those things can make things more difficult, more challenging. But I don't think the talent was there, and I think that there's going to need to be an influx of new faces there for them to sort of compete in what has become a pretty tough East Division. Now, lastly, the Rockies, who struggled right out of the gate, and I want to credit the coaching staff and the players who stuck around through that. That's never easy. It was a trying campaign. The year began with some merciless beatings. They lose. There's one game I remember they lost to the Shamrocks, something like 31-1. There was a multiple 22-1, 20-2 type games for them. But as the season progressed, at the end they were playing more competitive lacrosse, and that's something that can't be understated, because it's so easy to pack up and sort of say, you know what, this is just isn't working. There's no point here. But you know what? They didn't do that. They were on the road here up north late in the season. They did a pretty good job of competing. Even though, the scores were still a little lopsided, they weren't anything near what they were early in the season. And I think that's a good sign for them. And we'll see what the offseason can bring for a team that is in substantial need of reinforcements and some stability.
Yeah, it's just an unfortunate situation all around down with the Rockies. I mean, there's not much you can do, and kudos to them for, like you said, sticking through it. I mean, that's... Unfortunately, looking back, they've lost all 40 or 50 of their last 60 games dating back into 2022. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate for them. And, they were hoping for a fresh start with the rebrand over to the Southern Alberta Rockies. And, it will take them some time to get on their feet. But, there's nothing you can do but be hopeful for that team. And, all the best to them. And I'm hoping next year things turn up for the better for them.
Yeah, and I think it would do a lot for the landscape of that division, because I think it really tilted things in a way that I don't think is healthy for the league. I mean, you're seeing those teams play the Rockies 4 times each, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I think there's some things you can do to work around that a little bit more. I don't know if anybody would have expected that situation to be the way it was this year, and there's always going to be times where it is, but we'll see how things move forward there, and what they can do in the off season to sort of repair things in the Lethbridge area. So now it is playoff time, and it's time to get down to what everybody wants to talk about and what everybody wants to hear. And it's these little best of threes that we have to start off the playoffs. Round 1 is a best of 3 and round 2. So anybody that is new or just starting to follow the league, I think that's important to note. These are not best of 7s, and they happen, pretty quickly. They're all done basically in 48 hours, 60 hours. So make sure you don't miss it. They all start on Thursday and will commence, if they go all 3 games, on Sunday afternoon. So let's start with what is probably maybe the most intriguing. It is the most intriguing round 1 matchup with the Chill and the Mavericks. Season series, the Mavericks take the first game 12-9, the second game 7-6, and the third game 12-10. So all 3 games close. The Mavericks edging each one of them out. And the Mavericks were the home team in the first and third games of that series, and the last 2 were actually played quite recently. So we got some recent matchups to go off of here. The Mavericks come into the postseason 8-2 at home, so it's a tough place to play. And both teams averaged an identical 9.1 goals per game. So both teams have their scoring threats. I think that the biggest note here for me is, and listen to this, Keenen. Mavericks head coach Trey Christensen. He formerly coached the Red Deer Rampage. They went to the provincials in 2016, his first year as head coach, 2017, 2018, 2019. So 4 years in a row. They went to the Founders in 2017. So out of those 4 years, they were able to get out of the Larry Bishop once. They went to the Founders, got silver before losing in the national title game to the Orangeville Northmen. And then COVID hit, and Red Deer completely, their coaching staff didn't come back. I think in 2022, they were really short bodies. They struggled a little bit that year. And then in 2023, Trey shows back up with the Mavericks, and they were right there, very close to a playoff spot, sort of fell off late in the year. And now here we are in 2024, and he's right back in the mix and in the conversation for going back to the provincials with his new team. So talk about pedigree and talk about a guy that, what I take out of this is he's a guy that gets every ounce out of his players. Those Red Deer teams were good, but they were by no means supremely talented or anything. They did a lot of the small things very well, and a lot like this Mavericks team, they've taken on that they had that blue collar mentality that made them very tough to play against. And I think the keys to this series are the Chill are going to need to try and at least come close to that drive and relentless effort that the Mavericks play with, especially in transition and through the middle of the floor, between the blue lines, and win some of those possession battles. Get on and off the floor quickly, and they can't get killed in reverse transition, because I've seen that with a few teams in this league, and I've only seen the Chill once or twice. So maybe, it's not the greatest sample size, but the little bit I've seen is that's sort of where you can get them, and that's where the Mavericks thrive. So that's going to be a big thing for the Chill. And I think maybe even a bigger thing for them is that they're going to need to have their power play be a difference maker. I think a lot of times that's where skill and talent usually show up the most. I trust Brett Barron and his coaching staff to have a good plan there, and they might be able to gain some confidence through the man advantage. Now, ultimately, I worry the Mavericks' aggression and their superior transition game and loose ball ability is going to pull them through late in games, and those extra possessions can make a huge difference. I'm going to go Mavericks in 3 in what I think should be maybe the best, including the second round. This might be the best series of the entire playoffs. Keenan, what do you got here?
This series is going to be an absolute barn burner. Don't let the regular season fool you with the Mavs going 3-0 against the Chill. The Chill pulled it up their socks late in the year to steal that last spot from the Rampage. And quite frankly, I agree. I believe the Mavericks do pull out this series in 3. But it's not... the Chill aren't going to go down without a fight. These are going to be tight checking games. Likely going to have decent, maybe low double-digit scores, but you'll probably see double-digit scores through all 3 games. Yeah, this is just a matchup that, both teams are riding highs coming into the playoffs. The Mavericks, were briefly in first in the Central. And quite frankly, they could have had it against the Silvertips had the Tips not tied against the Chill. So quite frankly, I believe the Mavericks actually have a bit of, beef with the Chill coming into it, because the Chill were the only reason the Mavericks didn't get the first round bye. So, they're going to have a score to settle with them, but ultimately, yeah, I think the Chill pull out 1 win, likely at home. Mavericks in 3.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned double digits. Don't be shocked in this series if you see 1 or 2 of these games go like 6-4. This could be a series where, you sort of saw it a little bit with the Chill and the Silvertips on Friday. That there was no goals in the third. I believe that ended 4-4. I think that if the Chill goaltending steps up, but yeah, no, this definitely could be lower scoring, and oftentimes I think people confuse lower scoring to mean, slower, more boring lacrosse, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Oftentimes, the better the quality of game it is, the lower scoring it can be, because there's less mistakes, a lot less being given, and everything sort of having to be fought for. And I could see this series being played a lot in transition. At the same time, I think that it might benefit the Chill to try and slow it down and get out of that up and down style of play that guys like Hildebrandt really like to play. So it's going to be a really interesting battle between what I think are 2 very different style type teams. And it's going to be fascinating. And don't forget, you can check this out on YouTube at Mountain View Maverick Lacrosse. They do a good job with their coverage there. And games 1 and 3 will be out of Innisfail, where you can watch. And I believe the Chill are also covering game 2 on YouTube as well. So should be a series available for everyone to watch. And I highly suggest that you do so. All right. So now let's shift our attention over to the South, where it's a matchup that, I think everyone would have seen coming from the get-go, just with the way that this division shook out. I remember we were talking about this maybe like on pod 1 or pod 2 about how these 2 teams were destined to meet one another. And I want to start off by talking about how strange this series is to try and break down and try to analyze for so many reasons. Like, for one, these teams combined for 4 wins outside of against one another and the Rockies. And all of them were won by Okotoks. And like I said, from the first weekend of the season, these 2 teams would have known that they were about to meet in the middle of July in the opening round. Now, the Mountaineers, in particular, for me, are so Jekyll and Hyde. Some of their strangest losses and results anywhere in the league all season. Like, I remember them losing at home to Saskatchewan, 14-12. There were a couple other games where they were kind of head-scratchers. Like, they lost to the CROW when they came up here. So, I really, honestly, Keenan, I really don't know what to make of this series. I think one thing is for sure, though, discipline could be a huge factor. Tyrell teams are typically very calm and collected, and they don't really interact with the refs. They don't get too emotionally charged up, and they seem to focus on what they can control. Meanwhile, Okotoks took 150 more penalty minutes this season, and while I didn't love what I saw depth-wise from the Mountaineers this year and the couple games I did see, I do trust their coaching staff to get things clicking. They have a real difference maker with Dame. And I think specifically on the power play, I think that they can draw some things up that could make the difference. And I look for them to have some type of plan, at least to slow down Dunbar, Harlow, etc. Some of the Okotoks' big guns. Again, like in a close series, that could really make a huge difference. So I would say the other thing of note here is the Mountaineers had a disappointing end to 2023. They got swept by the Marauders in the first round, 2-0, in a couple of close games. And it's just by, playing the same team. You lose 8 fifth years last year, seeing their careers end. I sort of like how it sets up a little bit more for the Mountaineers. It's a tough call, but I'm going Mountaineers in 3 in a small upset here. Keenen?
Yeah, this is definitely a strange series. I mean, like you mentioned, like some of these losses that they have are like here's a weird one for you. Back at the end of June, they played the Shamrocks at the Stew, but they only lost 9-7 against the Shamrocks of all people. But then you go and you look at like some of these other losses, like a 14-12 loss against the SWAT at home, a 14-10 loss against the Rampage at home, a 5-4 loss against the Blizz at home. It's weird how they're performing against good teams, but then they play the worst teams and they don't seem to be doing quite as well. And that's not to say they haven't lost against good teams or beat a lot of bad teams kind of thing. But it's just an interesting setup, like you said. Like, they ended their season 6-14-0, but on paper, I mean, they should at least be a 500 club, which is just mind-boggling to me that they aren't. And of note with the discipline, they only took 300 penalty minutes the entire season, which is the second least amount of penalty minutes. The only team that had less was, well, their division rivals, the Shamrocks, at 182. So
That's wild, 182.
an absolutely wild stat for the Shamrocks, but we'll get into that next week when we cover round 2.
Keenen, that's less than 10 minutes per game. It's like just over 9 minutes per game.
Yeah, that is
Wild.
that is basically 9 minutes per game. I don't understand that, but again, that's a conversation for next week. But the Mounties, just I don't know. I want to take the Mounties in this series. Again, like you said, they lost. They're looking for redemption after last year. But I do think the Mounties win 1, but I don't think they win 2. I'm going to go Marauders in 3.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think that this series, like I said, it's almost impossible to try and handicap. I mean, I could see game 1 being some wild 13-12 open-ended sloppy game where both teams fill the net. And I could see it being 5-4 where, somebody wins in overtime on some great shot or something, or a penalty shot or something like that. Like, I think this series will have drama. I think both of these teams likely don't like each other very much. There's a lot of familiarity. They played 4 times already this season. So I think that the fans will be entertained here. I just don't. It's hard. It's really, really hard to say, yeah, this team's going to win. But just for the reasons above, that's why I ultimately have to go with the Mountaineers. But it should be another good series in the South.
And unfortunately, with those South series, they will not be streamed from what we can find. But both teams typically update live scores on their X channels, so definitely be sure to follow the Mountaineers and the Marauders on X.
All right, so let's conclude our round 1 preview here. We will talk about the Blizzard and Kings East final, of course, next week, because that's being played as every other divisional final will be next weekend. So we'll take care of that when it comes. But for now, let's just focus on the round 1 matchups that are taking place right here and in the now. And let's conclude with Outlaws Warriors. The Outlaws come in the 3 seed in the North. They take on the 2 seed Warriors. Season series, the Warriors take all 4 games, 16-7, 13-3, 8-5, and 15-9. The Warriors, of note, do lose Bill Hunter for these playoffs, so they'll be playing out of service. That does matter. I mean, they're traditionally very good at home. And also the last couple of years, they've had that turf, and that changes things a little bit. So that is something to remember as they head into the playoffs. They'll play round one, and then if they advance, round two out of service in terms of their home games. Now, the Warriors have only lost to the Outlaws. It's been something like 22 games since 2019. They've lost once, and that was late last season. I think that game ended up 13-6, something like that in Beaumont in one of the latter games of the 2023 season, right before the playoffs. Now, I think it's important to take a little bit of time to give the Outlaws a bunch of credit. I mean, they've been competitive, like very competitive this year with, again, a young team. And they've been in a state of flux. They make the coaching change halfway through the season. They've been short personnel, lots of APs, lots of different guys in and out of the lineup. And they've still held it together, and they've held a playoff position all season. So I think that's number one. I think you have to acknowledge and give credit to the Outlaws for the season they've had. It would have been easy to, after hosting the provincials last year and having things not go their way in terms of some of the players maybe not coming back and some of the roster situations that they had. They rebounded, they found a way to make it work, and they've made the playoffs. So that right there deserves acknowledgement. I think in this series specifically, the biggest goal for the Outlaws has to be to stay out of the box. Their man short usually isn't all that strong, and I think the Warriors will take advantage of it if they get a lot of opportunities. And the other thing that they can control, I think, is getting on and off the floor quickly. Don't allow the Warriors many odd man looks, and just simply trying to outwork the Warriors all over the place. And if they do so, they might have a chance to hang in here. Conversely, the Warriors, I think if they move the ball and they don't get selfish, that could simply just be too much here. I think the more that the Warriors sort of dictate the tempo and pace and put scoring pressure on the Outlaws, the harder it's going to be for the Outlaws to keep up, because there's only, there's sort of a ceiling that every team has. And if the Warriors are getting up over double digits consistently, that's going to be tough for the Outlaws to keep up with. So I think if the Outlaws can keep this a little bit lower scoring, a little bit slower paced, that's going to really help them. So with that, I think when you add in the experience factor, age, and just the offensive firepower the Warriors have, because that's really what the Warriors are. They're an offensive team, and they just have so many scoring threats. I got to go Warriors in two, to no surprise of anybody. I just don't know how you go with anything else here. Keenan, what you got?
Well, I agree. The Warriors are definitely an offensive powerhouse when you look at the North. And I think what the Warriors need to avoid in order... I don't want to say in order to beat the Outlaws, because you look at this series on paper, and it's very lopsided in the way of the Warriors. But I think the Outlaws are good at trying to win greasy games. They're good down low. They're good in the corners. And this is an Outlaws team that I think a lot of people have overlooked, simply due to the fact that, 7-13-0 was their final record. And sure, you're including 4 of those wins against 3 against the SWAT and 1 against the Rockies. But this is a team that's hung in there through a lot of the season. I mean, you look through their season, they lost 10-7 early in the season to the Rampage. They held their own against the Rebels on multiple occasions, including just this past Sunday on the final day of the regular season, a 10-9 loss to the Rebels in the Rebels barn. And the Rebels are the ones with the bye. So they were doing a pretty good job holding their own against them. They were coming off a 15-11 win against the Crude, but this is a team that isn't losing by huge margins all the time. So I look to the Outlaws to just be more gritty, and I think the grit will help them at least win a game against the Warriors. Do I think the Outlaws beat the Warriors in round 1? I'm going to say unlikely. I think the Warriors have too much going for them. the Warriors have a deadly power play. They're amazing at ripping it from outside. Like, it's just phenomenal what that team can do. So, and with that mid-season trade, I believe I'm not losing my mind. Yeah, that mid-season trade to gain Fodchuk, I mean, that already gained them a bunch of firepower from the CROW. So definitely look to the Warriors to keep up that fast-paced tempo, keep it on the outside, keep that ball moving. The Outlaws are dangerous once they get the ball down low and can set up. But if the Warriors don't let the Outlaws set up, this game series goes to the Warriors, without a doubt. That being said, I think the Outlaws do find a way to win somewhere. I'm going to say Warriors in 3.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the Outlaws, I just think that there's too much on the plate of a handful of guys. Like, I just think there's going to be too much on a young Grace to have to sort of carry the load. Maloney, and they do have guys like Weatherby that are really spark plugs and bring a ton of energy and so much determination. Like, you watch that guy play, you're like, man, like he just like instantly inspires everybody else on that team. Probably the smallest guy on the floor, at least most of the time. But he's not afraid of anything, will get involved in absolutely anything. He'll draw penalties. He'll bring the ball up the floor. So there's guys on that team that really can provide boosts. I just don't think there's enough of them. And the Warriors are just, I don't know. At the end of the day, they've really added and sort of supplemented that roster with the pieces they needed. And you also see they also got a couple of guys back quietly out the back gate, like over about halfway through the season. Rex Woney came back into the fold, Gibson. So I just think that the experience, the talent, and the overall depth of the Warriors will be too much here. And that's why I've got to go with the Warriors in 2, despite like I said, what's been an impressive season by the Outlaws in a lot of senses. So, not to knock the Outlaws. I think that they have some good things going there, and we'll definitely compete for that second spot in the provincials with the North hosting next year. So now, Keenan, I want to sort of conclude here with a little bit of schedule and format talk. And I sort of did the numbers because I know we've talked about this before. But I have an easy solution that I want to propose here. And I hope, as many people as possible sort of hear this. And because I know this has been discussed within the RMLL and their meetings and stuff. And, I just wanted to put this out there. So I think that in general, there's been a real lack of attendance. You go to games this year, arenas are empty. There's no atmosphere. Like, automatically there should be 200 people at every game. Like, automatically, if you're just talking about guys' parents and siblings and maybe a couple friends and just that alone, like the floor should be like 150, 200 people. And there's some games there's like maybe 50 people there. So I think we got to do things to sort of increase the quality of the product, the sort of the overall how compelling these games are and how meaningful they are. So what I sort of did was I looked at the number of games currently being played in the regular season, added it to the current playoff format, and basically I came out to the same number with a slight change here. So currently we have a 20-game regular season, right? And 2 rounds, best of 3, which equals 26 games total. Correct, Keenan?
Yeah. That is how my math works.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure. So you reduce the regular season to 16 games. You can cut out some of these division trips to Saskatoon, out of division trips to Saskatoon, Winnipeg, wherever, in the process, maybe to make it easier. And you bump the first round up to a best of 5 and the second to a best of 7. So even if this is the worst case scenario, even if both series go to the max, that's 2 more total games than we currently have. 16 regular season plus 5 plus 7 is 28, as opposed to the current 26 with the current format. And then you could even go a couple steps further, and to create better playoff races than what we've seen is you could create a couple wildcard spots that would cross over into another division's playoffs if they outperformed that division's third place team. So, for example, like Red Deer would get in over the Outlaws, or Red Deer would get in over whoever in that scenario, okay? And then you would, with that 16-game schedule, you would amplify the meaning of each game. You would reduce the number of teams the number of games against teams that are boosting other teams' records artificially, like what we saw in the South this year with those teams playing the Rockies 4 times each. And then, in turn, the teams will benefit because they'll be getting a better gate from more people coming to games, and they might be able to sell their product a little bit easier, which is another discussion. I think teams can definitely put themselves out there more and sort of maybe gain some community interest, but that's a story for another day. I just think it's a very doable, quick solution to some of the formatting and scheduling issues. That way, we're not having Red Deer played 8:30 in St. Albert and then playing at home at 11 against Manitoba the next day. Like, I don't know. There's just so many things that can be improved upon, and it's going to make life better and easier for the players. It's going to increase teams' revenue. It's going to make buildings with a better atmosphere. There's just so many benefits that would come of this. So I wanted to put this out there, and feel free to add absolutely anything you want to that.
I feel like a longer playoff series is always in the better. I would even argue keep the 20 games and start the season a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier. Like, there's no... Like, I understand our purpose of starting near the end of April, but we could start earlier and have a longer season, just straight out like that, and still end it August long. So I do think that the playoff series need to be a bit longer. I don't think a 3-game series does or best of 3 series does justice to anybody, especially when these teams are so competitive through a 20-game regular season. Just to, maybe lose in 2 games, and that's the end of your season. So I do think there need to be some format changes, absolutely. And honestly, there's no better time to do it, really, especially coming out of the COVID. Now we've got a couple seasons established under our belts. Maybe we start to look to make a change in the coming seasons.
Yeah, and I think sometimes all you have to do is put it in perspective. So think of it this way. Say you're the Rebels, and you spend all that money and all that time going to Regina on the May long weekend to play 3 games over a full 3 days, okay, in Saskatchewan. Now you've spent all that time and all those resources on a period of time where it really at the end of the day had very minimal impact on your season and where you're going, to only then turn around and now have your season decided against maybe the best team in the province over a weekend. Like, your season could be done just like that. Like, it could just be done in a snap. And I just don't think it does these teams justice. I don't think it does the players any favors. I don't think it does the programs, the organizations any favors. And I think it's just a simple way that we can change the landscape for the better. So with that, Keenan, that sort of does it for this week. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of throw in and add in here before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank everybody for, tuning in all season long and, giving us your comments and chiming in on the conversation on socials and everything. It's been definitely a bit different now hosting a podcast, taking it from the great Cody Jansen and turning it into what it is now on CROW, with you, Muhammad. I appreciate you guys all sticking around, listening to us, blabber on every week or so. And yeah, I mean, the growth has been amazing this year, and look forward to the future.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Keenan. And I also want to let everybody know next week, I will do a coach I'll interview a coach from each team that is in the North Final. We'll break down the series to come, what they expect, what they're looking for, try to get some insight there, and that'll be on top of our regular podcast as we preview round 2. As always, you can hit me up at MJ_9 on X and M.Joma on Instagram. And also, I want to encourage everyone to hit the thumbs up on these games as we approach the playoffs and we move through into the Larry Bishop. It helps our algorithm. It makes these games more visible, and it pulls people into the channel and allows people a better chance to be aware of what we got going on here. So anytime you can hit the thumbs up, do so, and also comment, interact, and give us your feedback. It's always welcome. And like Keenan said, we really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we can't wait to talk to you next week.
Absolutely. And as always, make sure follow us on all socials at CROW LAX TV on Instagram and on X. We always post score updates after they happen on Instagram and all of that. And as we move into Larry Bishop, we will be sure to bring you some extra action, including, and I think we've waited a little too long to say this, but we'll be doing a live Junior Beast podcast from the Larry Bishop just before the opening games 1 and 2 on the Friday. I'm looking really forward to that, and you never know who might pop by. So as always, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week on the Junior Beast.